Welcome to Writing Black Joy Season 3. I'm Sophia Robinson, and I'm a story listener, a writing coach, an editor, as well as the producer of Writing Black Joy, a virtual space that celebrates, centers, and promotes the voices of Black writers and storytellers with joyful and uplifting stories. Here, you'll find conversations with some of my favorite Black writers and storytellers, learn more about their projects and the joy they're bringing into the world, hear more about their creative processes, and find inspiration for your own creative ventures, as well as tips and strategies for writing poetry, blogs, creative nonfiction, fiction, plays, and so much more from all types of writers, as well as a sneak peek into the writing life. You could even find your next favorite writer, book, poem, play, or blog. And if you're a Black writer who is looking for a coach or an editor to help you bring your joyful story into the world, then click on my website below to find out how to work with me. In the meantime, let's go to today's guest. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Writing Black Joy. Thank you so much for joining me again. And just a reminder, if you haven't done so already, to hit subscribe, share this episode with a friend, and if you're an Apple user, please leave me a rating and a review. Today, I have with me one of my dream guests, Tracey Michae'l Lewis-Giggetts. She's an incredible author, and so I just want to tell you a bit about her. As a writer and thought leader, Tracey offers those who read her work and hear her speak an authentic experience, an opportunity to explore the intersection of culture, identity, and faith and spirituality at the deepest levels. She's the founder of HeARTspace, spelled H-E with capital A-R-T, space, a healing community created to serve those who have experienced trauma of any kind through the use of storytelling and the arts. Tracey has a Bachelor of Arts degree in communication from the University of Kentucky, a Master of Business Administration degree from Montclair State University, and a Master of Fine Arts degree from the Fairleigh-Dickinson University. She is a former assistant professor of English and Black Studies at the Community College of Philadelphia. As a writer, Tracey has published 18 books, including several collaborations with numerous high-profile authors. In 2021, Tracey became one of the 20 writers who contributed to the groundbreaking book, You Are Your Best Thing, Vulnerability, Shame, Resilience, and the Black Experience, edited by acclaimed researcher Brené Brown and founder of the Me Too movement, Tarana Burke. Her most recent publication is the critically acclaimed book, Black Joy, Stories of Resistance, Resilience, and Restoration, which has received rave reviews from celebrities like Kerry Washington, literary writers like Kais Lehman, and media outlets like Good Morning America, Essence Magazine, and USA Today. Her forthcoming book, Then They Came for Mine, Healing from the Trauma of Racial Violence, examines the source and impact of racial violence against Black people in all of its forms and offers a blueprint for the way the Christian church can help facilitate healing. Tracey has spoken on a number of platforms on topics related to race and social justice, education, faith and spirituality, wellness, and so much more. And her freelance work has also been published in print and online publications such as Oprah Daily, The Washington Post, Essence Magazine, The Guardian, etc. I could go on. So you heard it in there. Tracey literally wrote the book on Black Joy, or a book about Black Joy, I should say, because there are so many out there, which is why I started the series. Tracey and I talk about how she came to her joy journey through grief, dance parties with her daughter and the duality of grief and joy, her search for the feeling of joy in her body, the both and stories of Black lives, her definition of Black joy, how she writes from a place of authenticity, inspiration and creating rituals that help her write, switching her voice as a ghostwriter, the importance of finishing, how she chooses future projects from her myriad of ideas, and so much more. I really hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. Hi, thank you so much for joining me, Tracey. Welcome to Writing Black Joy. You are like the queen of Black Joy. So I'm really excited to have you in my season 3 of my podcast. How are you doing today?
I am well, and thank you so much, so much, so much for having me, and even just for having this podcast. I appreciate it so much.
Oh, that's perfect. Thanks. So, I obviously would have read your bio before we started the interview, but I kind of came across. I was searching for books, and I came across the book, and then I came across your articles in the Washington Post.
Yes,
Right, and I know that's kind of where it all started.
yes.
So, tell me a bit about how did you start writing about Black Joy in the Washington Post? I'm curious.
Sure. So I entered, I think, my joy journey. That's what I tend to call it. My
Mhm.
discovery of what joy meant for me through grief. So I'd lost a family member to racial violence in 2018. I was also in therapy doing a lot of just sort of deep trauma work. And it just so happened that, and everything is about timing. It just so happened that as I was doing this work, and my daughter happened to be watching me grieve, we had this really, and I write about this in the book, like this really amazing moment where we were trying to prevent a greenhouse from flying away, and we ended up dancing. And there
Yeah,
was
the
an
dance
interesting,
party.
yeah, and um, it was an interesting moment, internal moment for me, because while I was very present and very there, and we were Gen X versus Gen Z battle, it was also, I was deeply aware of like perception, like how we would be perceived in that moment, that whole duality piece. And so I wrote about it. And I wrote about that experience. And so this also happened to happen right after George Floyd was murdered,
Right, in
and
2020.
right after Breonna Taylor case came to light and all of that. So, of course, Black folks were in vogue in that moment. So I pitched it to the Washington Post. They picked it up, and simultaneously, I had began to try to figure out what joy felt like in my body. My therapist
Mm.
asked me a very pointed question: "What does joy feel like in your body?" And I couldn't
Ooh.
answer her. And so
Mm.
I went on this investigation, if you will, this deep dive into my own experience with joy. And then that led me to how my ancestors have always been able to wield joy. And that was the very beginning. And so I started writing, and then the book deal happened, and all this thing kind of happened afterward.
Okay, I love that. And I like, you said it started, it was born out of joy, and it's something you write about it a lot, obviously in the book, but it's something I've spoken to other sort of guests about and experienced myself, is like that whole, like holding both of those things, like you
Yes.
have the grief and the joy, and how you can experience both. I'm curious, what answer did you give your therapist eventually about how does it feel in your body? Because I think sometimes it's such a, because you have all those other things going on in your body, sometimes I feel like it's the one that you're least connected to
Absolutely.
sometimes.
You're absolutely right. I think rage and sorrow were really big in my body, right?
Mm.
And to the extent that it, affected me physically. So in
Mm.
2019, I came off a severe illness, because I think in part because of the amount of trauma and the amount of grief that I was holding in my body. Because, as a Black woman, I'm told I have to be strong. I'm told I have to hold it down. And so I had
Mhm.
lies, and had not allowed myself to sort of unpack that. So when my therapist asked me that question, I did not have an answer for her, but what I did do was become increasingly intentional about figuring it out. And so I happened to be watching, and this is another essay in the book, where I happened to be watching a very popular nighttime television show. and, and I, as a storyteller, as a writer, I was so engaged with these characters. These characters were amazing, and they were amazingly written. And I happened to be present in the moment to say, oh, wait a minute, I'm literally experiencing joy right now. Like, I was on a high, to the extent
Mm.
that my husband walked into the room and was like, I think you need to be alone, because I don't know what's happening. Because I had like this grin on my face. My body was responding to the pleasure of watching the show. And so, the tingling in my chest, the warmth, the excitement bubbling. And so I went back to my therapist, and I was like, oh, I got it. Like, I know what it feels like. She's like, so now you have a snapshot, a screenshot of what joy feels like in your body. So when rage and sorrow and all of those things are really big, you can call it up via your
Mm,
memory, via
I
the
love
power of
that.
your mind. Yeah, you can call it up. The same way, like if I said to you, Sophia, what does anger feel like? Like you could probably think of a memory that will set you off,
Hmm. From this
right?
morning, perhaps.
That part, like all of
I
the
know,
things
right?
that you can think of. But joy,
Hmm.
like you said, is a lot harder for us
Yeah.
to step into because, again, there's a whole lot of societal, historical stuff around us experiencing joy. And
Mm.
so once I got that snapshot, it was now, okay, so how can I be intentional about creating moments of
Tapping
joy in
in.
my life? Yes, tapping
Mm.
in, absolutely.
I love that so much. And then the book, obviously, it's a collection of the essays. I were the essays specifically written for? I know some of them were written for other, sort of
Mhm.
platforms. Were they any that were just written for the book, or is it just a collection of essays that you'd already written?
No, the majority of them were written for the book. There were only, I want to say, 7, I think, that had been written. There's 36 essays. So there are only about 7 that
Mm,
were previously written that I kind of revamped for the book. The rest of them are fresh, brand new.
mm.
Um, and that experience was just so amazing to be able to write those stories. They were brand new.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you, we're going to talk a bit about the book because you've written a lot of books, and obviously I'm curious how this one was different to some of the others. So we'll talk about that a bit later. But I want to, one of the things, obviously, the podcast is Writing Black Joy. And one of the questions I always ask my guests is like, why is it important to you to write Black Joy? I mean, you literally wrote the book Black Joy. So like, why do you think it's so important for us, for the world, to have those joyful stories being told?
Yeah, I mean, because I think a lot of times the narratives around Black life, Black literature, are heavy. They and I say this not as a critique; they're necessary, right? Like
Mm,
these
absolutely.
stories of our traumatic experience, our historical situation, all of those things are necessary. But I believe in the and also. Right. And the
Mm,
and also means that, and yes, in the midst of carrying the weight of the transatlantic slave trade or segregation or Jim Crow or colonization globally, all of those kinds of things, we also have joy and peace and love. We have all of those human experiences that we, as you mentioned earlier, have been holding in these vessels simultaneously. And so I just think the importance of talking about Black joy and the way that I entered the conversation through this book was like, to not shy away from the trauma, like not shy away from those stories, but
right.
also emphasize the and also, and to show how joy is ever present. It is an undercurrent. Even I make the distinction early in the introduction between happiness and joy, like
Yes.
those are
Yeah,
two
I love that.
totally different things. And for Black folks, like that's important because when happy moments eluded us because of the external stuff that was happening, we still had joy and there was
Yeah.
this undercurrent and presence of it. And so that's why I wrote the book, because I need us, sometimes we forget, right? And I want us to I want that book to be the thing that folks grab when they need to be reminded of how joy is accessible and available to them no matter what's going on, good or bad or
Yeah.
indifferent, right?
Yeah, that's perfect. I know I spoke to you about this obviously before we jumped on because I loved all the essays, but I will say actually my favorite part of the book was the introduction
Oh
because it was
wow.
just a real sort of I guess kind of a deep dive into like why you're celebrating Black joy so much. And I love that you started with the question, does joy have a color? So I had asked you to read a little segment of it for us, which I would love you to do now.
Absolutely. Um, and just as sort of like a lead into this, I when I wrote the Washington Post piece, I did get a lot of resonance, like people that
Mm,
resonated with them, but there were also people that struggled with this idea of Black joy. Like, is this another way we
yes.
are dividing ourselves? And I said no. And joy absolutely can have a color, a race. Black
Love.
joy is unique and deeply rooted in the cultural experiences and expressions of Black people across the diaspora. It's ever present and yet often hidden. There is a kind of laughter that only Black people recognize, one that signals more than just a funny thing happened on the way to. A laughter that unearths a salve we need in the midst of a reality that, on its worst day, can be insidiously paralyzing. Black joy has a sound. It moves in a particular way. It tastes like pot liquor and cornbread, but at the same time, shrimp and grits, but also
Mm.
fufu and jollof. And I cannot forget pumpkin spice lattes because, of course, we are not all the same. Blackness is not monolithic, but we know it when we see it. Its scent is subtle yet piercing, like great grandmother's talcum powder and Gina Tay. It enters the room before you do and stays long after you leave. This is why we must tap into it.
Oh, I love that. That was like really one of my favorite passages. And I'm from the Caribbean, so when you talked about them, like, rice and peas and
Yes.
all the all the stuff that's like very Caribbean. And then I have a friend who she's a chef, and she loves talking about how even some of our food traditions have roots in Africa and stuff like that. So it's like you said, it's just this universal experience that we can all kind of sense when you see somebody else, even if they're from another country.
Absolutely.
I absolutely love it.
It's a thread. Like, it's not monolithic, but you know it when you see it. Like, there's a thread that is consistent.
Yes.
I love on Twitter during the holidays, there's a hashtag called Black at Thanksgiving. And of course, not everyone celebrates Thanksgiving, but these family gatherings, and how whether you live in Oakland or the Caribbean or Africa or the East Coast or the West Coast or the South, like, no matter what hemisphere you live in, there's some threads that we all recognize. And I just think that's so powerful. That's the distinctness of our experience, and that's what makes Black joy. Absolutely.
I love that. I love that so much. So I really enjoyed your book. I love that it's a collection of essays. I haven't read a lot of books that are like that. They're just a collection of essays, but because I started off as a blogger, so I love that little short, like bite-size bits that you can just like read one, put it down, come back to it, that type of thing. But you've written a lot of books. So I wanted to talk a little bit about your own writing process. So first of all, do you find like every book is different, or was this book in particular different to some of the other books that you've written?
I would honestly say this book in particular was very different than anything that I'd ever written before. For many reasons. I've written fiction and poetry and nonfiction. I'm a ghostwriter, so I've had collaborations with high profile folks and their stories. But this Black Joy book, I've said this often, I felt the most free on the page. It was a liberating experience. Toni Morrison talks about the little white man on the shoulder and the white gaze, and how sometimes as Black writers, we can be maybe even too conscious of the voices that are not our voices, right? That will influence or impact, where our work gets placed in the world.
Yeah.
And I let all of that go with Black Joy. I made some very clear decisions to, flick the little white man off my shoulder and to focus very clearly about speaking to Black people, right? And making clear that that's my audience. Of course, I love everyone to read the book, but I am talking about a very specific experience to my folk, right?
Yeah.
So that to me was liberating, and I bled on the page. And there's things that I've written about that it's still very scary to even imagine that I actually have that out in the world right now. But I feel like it was necessary. It was a healing process for me. And in that way, it was very different than anything else. I kind of took the veil off, if you will, and just decided that, I'm going to put this out there, let the chips fall where they may, right? And
they may.
Yeah, and it's been a blessing since then, since the book has come out, to know that when you do that, when you're authentically yourself, how everything else kind of falls into place. The things that you were worried about or fearful of don't necessarily have as much power.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I'm curious because, you two things you mentioned. One is obviously that authenticity, that freedom, that like feeling, but also the fear that came along with it. Like, I can't believe I'm putting this piece of myself out into the world that maybe nobody has seen or has associated with. And I think sometimes, I speak to people who want to write or who want to publish a book or whatever, and they're
Mhm.
like, they think that once you've done it, you're not afraid anymore. Like, oh, you've done it. You have no fear. Like, they're really afraid, but like you've written countless books, like you said, fiction, nonfiction, everything.
Mhm.
And so I think it's good for people to know that you do still get afraid, not obviously to
Absolutely.
think, but like, I think we all have different fears. One thing I was wondering then, given that, as you said, you made it very clear the audience for this book is your
Mhm.
people. And this is something that I've been, spoken to a few sort of writers about recently, talking about, like, sometimes I think that different audiences need a different book, right? If you're
Yeah.
writing an anti-racism book for mostly of a white audience, you may be telling different stories, be speaking differently than you would do if you are, speaking to a black audience, just say for argument's sake.
Mhm.
Um, I'm curious. What do you prefer?
Well, I don't. It's interesting because I don't know if there's a preference per se. What I
Mm,
will say is, well, a lot of people ask me about, well, are you saying white people can't read your book? And that's absolutely not what
mm,
I'm saying. And I always give this example because I feel like it helps kind of clarify what I mean by I'm writing to my people. And so my husband and I and my daughter, there was this Greek festival in our old neighborhood that we used to go to every year. We loved this Greek festival. We went when she was really little, and we would go and we'd eat well and we'd enjoy the entertainment and the dancing and all that kind of thing. But at no point in time did we ever say, tell them how to cook their baklava or jump on the stage and try to do their dances with them. We sat in observation and an appreciation of what this culture means to this group of people, and we were able to participate without necessarily centering ourselves. And
mhm.
so that's how I ask people who are not black to engage the book. You should absolutely read it. You should read it from the standpoint of appreciation of this way of being that this group has been able to survive and thrive in this world, and
Yeah.
and draw, of course, from the universal themes, but also respect this without having to center yourself or say, well, why did you say this about white people? It's not about you, it's not for you. There will be chapters you probably won't understand, and that's okay. And be okay and use it as maybe a learning experience as opposed to something that you have to be involved with. And
Mm,
I think that's challenging for some folks, right?
yeah.
Because everyone has an opinion, especially nowadays, about how their level of involvement in a story or in a narrative. And I probably, after having written Black Joy, will always have that level. I want to retain that level of freedom in whatever I write. So I'm not
Mm,
really interested in, like my next book is probably more targeted towards white people, but I always say I'm writing at them and not for them. Right.
right.
So there's some things that you maybe need to recognize and unpack, but I'm not necessarily writing for you because I'm all about the healing, right? The healing is very important to me for Black and Brown people. So,
Mhm,
in terms of like preference, I just think that I learned something from this experience about
right.
what it means to be my authentic self, and I'm choosing to do
Yes.
that going forward.
Regardless of who you're writing for.
Exactly.
Mhm. And I like that because even with this podcast, I had a moment sort of before I started looking to do season 3 of like, should I change the name? I had all these different thoughts that were
Mhm.
going through my head. And
Yeah.
a part of it was that I felt a bit torn because on the one hand, I was like, the name of this podcast is exactly what I wanted it to be.
Mhm.
This podcast is exactly what I wanted it to be. But on the other hand, feeling like there were some people who weren't black who kind of felt like just by looking at the name, just by looking at like, oh, it's not for them. And I'm like, but it's for everybody. Like I feel like
Right.
everybody could benefit from it, and sort of feeling almost like like that push pull between like, should I pull it back? Should I tone it down? Should I
Yeah.
make it more universal?
Yeah.
Or should I let it be exactly what it wants to be and what I wanted it to be?
I feel you.
Yeah.
I have absolutely been there. And where I think I am now is I think, and I think I talk to a lot of creators and writers and artists that about the same thing. Is like, why isn't it okay for us to just, envision a thing the way we, envision it, and to implement it, execute it the way that we envision it,
Yeah.
and be okay with saying that maybe it's not for you.
For everyone.
Like,
Yeah.
I think Black and brown folks are always forced to try to be more universal than white folks who don't necessarily feel the intensity pressure to be
Mm.
universal,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
they're quote unquote the standard. And so I think I am me personally in my own work, I'm just being okay that absolutely everyone is free to read my books and to engage with my works, and I'm happy to talk with anybody, black, white, brown, doesn't matter, about my work, but my intentions are my intentions. And if you feel disconnected from the work because of that, that's got to be okay.
Yeah.
you
That's true.
know
I mean, I don't like every book I read.
exactly,
Right?
exactly.
No, you're absolutely right. I definitely get that. And you can probably tell I haven't changed any. I haven't done any of like I
Yeah,
just decided
right,
to let it be what it was. But I definitely had a moment of like,
for
you
sure.
know, yeah, I definitely had a moment for that. Um, so tell me a bit about your own sort of creative process. You obviously, you said you're a ghostwriter. You
Mhm,
would have written articles. You've written multiple books on like multiple topics.
mhm,
Um, do you have like any rituals or like anything that
mhm.
you find really helps to get you into that creative sort of zone that you need to? Well, I don't know. I need to be in a creative zone when I write. So.
Yeah, no. I think I used to, and I think I am longing for that right now. I think when you get a certain point in your career where you have deadlines and you have certain expectations, you kind of lose the sweetness of the creative zone, right? Because you're writing the deadline and you're trying to meet certain markers. So I think I am in a space today talking to you where I am longing for that time before, where there was a lot of space and creativity to just
Hmm.
work on the thing or not, right? I do
Hmm.
have
Yeah.
some rituals. I am very much a space person. And so I've created my office to be a space where I feel like I can write. And so that's been very important to me. I tend to do better in the mornings.
Oh my
And
goodness,
so
me too. I'm a morning
so,
writer.
but I used to be, because I taught writing. I was a professor, and I used to be that write every day. And I'm not necessarily that person anymore that was like, you should write every day for X amount of time a day. I think I'm now like, whatever consistency looks for you. So for some people, consistency is 15 minutes on a Sunday afternoon when everybody is doing their thing and you don't have a lot, like whatever. Some people can't write in
Mm,
the morning because they're not writing full time, right? I
yeah.
recognize the privilege of being able to write
Yes.
full time,
Hmm.
right? And so, but for me, because I do have multiple things I'm working on simultaneously, um, making sure that I can share one really kind of cool thing is I have
Yes.
a scent for every project.
I love it.
So one of the things that I understand is the connection between our bodies and our minds and our spirits, right? And so sometimes, especially if I'm ghostwriting a project and I'm working on my personal work, I need to get out of the ghostwriting voice
Switch
and
out of one
enter,
voice and like
yeah,
switch back into your own voice.
exactly, and enter another. And I use the sensory to do that. So I
Mm.
have a scent for a particular project I'm working on. And so I put that on and I can dive in, and I there's a connection between our olfactory, our nose and our mind, and so when I am done with that project, I'll go and I'll wash my hands or whatever, and then I'll put on a new scent for the next project.
I love
Right.
that.
And that is real. That is, I got that idea, I think, from my therapist. And like that is very helpful in sort of exiting and entering another project, so that there's no overlap.
That's
And so
brilliant.
that's one of the ritual. That's a recent ritual.
I absolutely love that, because I was gonna actually ask you about that. Like, if you're working on multiple projects at once, how do you? I mean, like, years ago, somebody asked me if I would ever consider ghostwriting, and I was like, if I ghost wrote, everything would sound like me, right? Reading my blog post,
Right.
most people that read my blog post is like, I can hear your voice. I'm like, yeah, you can
Right.
hear my voice in
You
everything.
definitely cannot do
If
that. in
you some
ghostwriting.
celebrity book and you'd be like, why does this person sound like Sophia? That's weird. So yeah, no,
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
find it so
Yeah.
hard to even get out of my. So to me, to like doing that switching back and forth, like
Yeah.
within projects, I think is so clever to have a way that is really tangible that can just sort of put you into another mode. I had when I was writing my first book, I had this musical playlist, and I would get up in the morning, like I would wait, and as soon as I put the music on, and so it got to the point then where, like, as soon as I heard the first few bars of like the first couple of songs, it was like your brain's like, ping, it's time to write now, and it's like it really.
That is the same thing. Like, I think we miss those opportunities those are triggers for us. Like, you can actually train your body to if you're not the most consistent person in the world, which I'm not, I love a ritual. I'm not a routine person, right? So I don't
Ooh,
routine. If I have to do the same thing at the same time every day, you know what I'm saying? Like my brain
not
is going to
happening.
explode. So having a ritual that allows for that flexibility, allows for you to enter and leave a project is, for me, has been important. And it's a playlist too. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm very auditory, so I love the playlist. But I think we all, I think the sense of smell, sorry, is
Yes.
something that we all connect really well to, and so I love the idea of having a different scent for a different project. That's purely brilliant. I love that so much. I'm curious, either in for this project or any of the other books that you work on, what would you say is your proudest moment as a writer?
Whew. This is going to be like probably not I don't know, not the best answer or the most
No such thing.
fascinating answer. It's finishing.
Yes. Listen, that is the answer. I am sorry, right? Like, that is the thing. I
So
was
every time I finish,
every
that
time you finish a
is,
book, you're like,
yes, like finishing a draft or a final draft or something like that
mhm.
is a big deal, because I am one of those, I'm not a fan of writing, but I love to have written. Right.
Yes,
And so I'm like
I
one of
know.
those people, right? And so the idea that I got from the starting point to a finishing point is probably always my most proudest moment. So
I
finishing
love
Black Joy, finishing Then They Came for Mine, finishing this project or that project, absolutely. Those are my most proud
that.
moments.
And there's something magic about finishing. I was saying, I always say this, like whenever I'm talking to people who are like, I have a friend who, she was on the first season of the podcast, and she
Mhm.
was like working on 3 different books at the time, and I was like, just finish one. You will be amazed.
Absolutely.
There's a magic that takes place when you finish that first one that will literally propel you forward to finishing other projects. But sometimes you just have to finish one thing. So
You
I think
do.
finishing is like, it is just like pure magic. I can't even think of another word to describe it.
And that propelling is absolutely true. You finish one and something in your brain says, I can do it. I did it.
Mm,
I can do it. And so
absolutely.
it's an
And I can
extra
do it again.
motivation. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely love that. Is there anything, we talked a little bit about the different fears, that you might have had in writing Black Joy. Were there any other obstacles that you faced, that want to mention? You may not.
No, I mean, I think the biggest thing is just work-life balance, which I know is like, probably a more corporate term, but like just ensuring that I had the time to set aside. I'm a mother. I have a partner, my husband. You know, like we have a life. We have a house we were renovating. We were in a pandemic. You know,
What?
all
All
of
of
the
that
things.
at once?
Yeah,
My
like
goodness.
all of this stuff is happening, and um, and I still have to work. This is my work. Like I'm writing, and at
Mm,
the time when I was writing Black Joy, I was still teaching. So I was
wow.
also teaching full time, and so I think the challenge for me always is, making room and making space and making time for the work and quality time, right? Like time to be able to sit with these stories that I'm telling because, as I said, I'm bleeding on the page. So it's not just, oh, I'm just telling a story or I'm making up a character. I am really sharing my heart and my life.
Mm,
And I'm also using it as an entry point to speak with my ancestors and to,
yes.
and to do the research I need to do. And all of that takes time. And so it's
Mm,
always for me time management, which
mm.
is always a challenge.
Yeah.
Um, but somehow we make it through, right? Like I
Yeah,
made
yeah.
it.
And I'm so glad that you did. I'm curious because I know you write fiction as well, and I write both fiction and nonfiction, although not to the level that you're at. But I had this conversation with another one of my previous guests, but she's a really good friend of mine, and I was saying to her, like, I actually love writing fiction. What you said about being authentic and being able to just put it all out there,
Mhm.
I feel that way when I'm writing fiction.
Absolutely.
I actually feel more that way when I'm writing fiction than anything else because you could almost feel that freedom to just like you're almost like removed from the process, you know? It's like
You absolutely are. When I write fiction, and I'm looking forward to writing fiction again,
mm,
because with this newfound liberating liberation,
right.
I just can't imagine what I'm going to have these
Oh,
characters going through.
it's gonna be so good. It's gonna be
There
like
is freedom. I don't have to hold back.
yeah.
And I am excited about that. But you're absolutely right. Like I think there is a freedom of imagination,
Yes.
which is
Yeah.
something that's very, very much connected to Black joy. Our ancestors, in particular, had a freedom of imagination because we didn't have the physical freedom all the time.
Mm.
Our
Oh,
imaginations were free, right? And so that's the reason why every major American musical genre comes from us, whether it's jazz or gospel or hip hop or country or rock and roll or popular music. It comes from our rhythms and our pains. Like it's not sourced anywhere else, any American musical genre. And so the truth of the matter is that's innovation, that's
yeah, it is.
creativity, that is imagination. So where we can be freer in our minds, even if our bodies aren't free. And that to
Uh,
me is what I hope when I do get back into fiction and screenwriting and that kind of thing, I'll get to explore that even more.
fun times. How do you decide what you're writing next? I mean, aside from the ghostwrite, like the work
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah,
like
yeah.
how do you decide like this is the next? Because I mean, if you're like, I always have a million book ideas. It's like,
Right.
how do
Yeah.
you
And I
pick the
do.
next one?
I remember when I signed with my agent and we were talking through, like, we got the Black Joy book deal, and they were talking through some of my other projects, and I was
Mm.
just hitting her with different projects, that I
Uh,
had already been working on ideas, and she was like, "Where is this coming from?" And I'm like, I'm not new to this. I'm true to this. I got 20
constant,
years of a vault, so
constant.
we gonna work because I got 20 years of a vault. And right now, though, I think what I'm learning is balance and ease, which is really important for me right now, especially after all of the wild craziness from the beginning of this year for Black Joy. And my friend said this to me actually recently. She said, because of the weight of the content of Black Joy,
Hmm.
the weight of my next book, which is Then They Came for Mine, Healing from the Trauma of Racial Violence, right? The weight,
Hmm.
the heaviness of those two books. She's like, I want you to write about lipstick. I want you to write something light. I want you to write something fun. And I think that's going to be my gauge for what I go to next is like, I need to come out of this sort of weighty, heavy topics. And so it probably will be fiction or comedy writing or something like that so that I can right size myself, so I can access the
Yes.
joy that I just spent a year talking about,
Yeah.
And so I think that's going to be my next move. And but I'm also really compelled by God, and I'm really compelled by, the movement of my life. And so if my movement, I feel compelled to write another Black Joy, then that will be what it
Out it
is.
comes.
So,
I love that.
right.
I absolutely love that.
Yep.
Is is there any I mean, you've obviously taught, as you said, taught writing for a long time, so you probably have loads of advice that you would give a young writer, but like, if there was one thing you wish you had known,
Mhm.
or advice that you would give a younger sort of budding writer, what would it be?
I always say this, don't take advice. That's my advice.
I love it.
And the reason why is I believe in the power of mentorship. I believe in the power of learning from people. So I'm not saying that at all, but I think you always and forever, like my great grandmother used to say, have to take the meat and spit out the bones, because everybody has a
Mm,
different route in this thing. Everybody has a different path. And I can tell you all day long what worked for me, and you implement it, and it doesn't work for you because it doesn't work for your personality, your life,
mm,
your journey, right? So I think you have to take the nuggets that work and figure out who you are, and implement those nuggets through the lens of what your life is and what who you are, right? And so sometimes we can get locked into a piece of advice because Tracey said do this, and
yeah.
then when it doesn't work, we internalize it as something being wrong. I'm not a good
Wrong.
writer. I'm not a good person. And it really, that's not it. It's just that advice does not work for you, right? Or maybe only a piece of that advice works for you and not all of it in its entirety. So
Yeah.
just I won't say don't take advice, but I'll say my advice is to be very leery or very cautious or very discerning about the advice that you
Mm.
internalize.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Definitely. As you said, I feel like it's a very much a kind of a take what works and leave the rest type of thing.
Exactly.
For sure,
Exactly.
sure, sure. Well, we're almost sort of at wrapping up time. I'm curious, what do you like to read? Because you write so much. What do you like to read when you're
Yes.
not, you know, writing your own stuff?
So there's two things. Like I love, again, fiction and nonfiction, but I love fiction. I love literary
Mm,
fiction. I can go deep and like unearth all of the things from the Toni Morrison, Toni K. Benbar. Like that's that is part of me, and I want to learn from the masters, right? Like, so
yes.
I am always reading, but then sometimes I need a brain break.
I was
And
gonna say,
so
like, it's one thing to be learning from the masters. We don't be learning from the masters all the time. Like, sometimes you just need like
exactly.
some brain candy,
I
right? Like,
love a
ooh.
good romance. I love a good, suspense novel. I love something that's going to keep me where invested in characters, and caring about
Mm,
characters.
yeah,
So I'm like that even with film and television. Like I want to be invested in those characters and their characters' trajectory. But sometimes I just need light, right? So a
yeah,
Jasmine how do you pronounce her name? Guillory
yes.
novel will
Hmm.
soothe my soul,
I love that. I love her.
especially as I am coming out of writing such heavy stuff, right?
Yes.
Or as I'm listening to Stacey Abrams' novel, When Justice Sleeps, right? And that's like a really suspense novel, right? And it's like, yes, like I can release myself from sort of the weighty topics that I tend to write about. But I
Yes.
mean, I read across multiple genres, and I feel like you
Mm.
almost have to do that as a writer.
Yeah, I feel like it's at the very least it's worth reading the type of thing that you want to write. Um,
Absolutely.
so yeah, why not? So you write all sorts of things. So I'm not surprised that you do. Okay, well, I really am so glad we were able to have a chat. I'm gonna put all the sort of details in the show notes about the book. And do you have anything else coming up that you want to mention before we wrap up?
So my
Yeah.
book after Black Joy, the next book arrives September 13th. It is Then They
Ooh.
Came for Mine, Healing from the Trauma of Racial Violence. It's available wherever books are sold. And then the paperback for Black Joy comes out in November. So those are the two projects for this year.
Perfect. Well, I really appreciate you joining me. Thank you so much for the conversation. It was great. And I will drop everything in the comments and look forward to your next book and the next one and the next one.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I truly, truly enjoyed our conversation.
Yes, so did I as well. Thank you so much, Tracey, and everyone else. Sending you big love from a small island. Thank you for joining us today. You can find out more about our guests in the notes below, and don't forget to hit subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss new episodes when they drop. And if this has inspired you to get your own writing project into the world, click on my website below and learn how you can work with me as a writing coach or an editor. Until next time, I send you big love from a small island.